Okay, so let's take a look at page 562, numbers 3 through 8. And they're asking us to find the trigonometric ratios of the two acute angles. So here I have my right triangle. Obviously, angle C is a right angle. So obviously, angle A and angle B are going to be the two acute angles because both of those angles measure less than 90 degrees. So let's start with angle A. Okay, let's do the three trig functions of angle A. So if you look here, I have my right triangle, which is number 3 on page 562. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to label my triangle. So I'm going to do angle A first. So if this is A here, this is going to be my opposite side. Obviously, here's my 90-degree angle. Of course, the side across from the 90-degree angle is going to be the hypotenuse, and what's left over is going to be the adjacent side. So A tells me this is my opposite. The 90-degree always shows me the hypotenuse, and what's left over is the adjacent side. So now I can do the sine, cosine, and tangent of angle A. So the sine function tells me that it's the opposite over the hypotenuse. Well, the opposite here happens to be 4, and the hypotenuse here happens to be 5. So the sine of angle A is going to be the opposite of 4 over the hypotenuse of 5. And look at that. So the sine of A is equal to 4 over 5, which is equal to 0.8. Next, let's take a look at the cosine function of angle A. The cosine function tells me that it's the adjacent over the hypotenuse. By the way, do you notice how easy it is to see this when I labeled my triangle? That's the first thing you should do. The first thing you should do is you should label your triangle, so make sure you put that in your notes. So the cosine function of A is going to be the adjacent over the hypotenuse, which is going to be adjacent 3, hypotenuse 5. So the cosine of A is going to be 3 over 5, which is 0.6. And finally, the tangent of angle A is going to be the opposite over the adjacent. Well, the opposite side is 4, the adjacent is 3, so the tangent of angle A is 4 over 3, or 1.33 repeating. And those are the three trig functions of angle A. Now, why am I doing all three? We'll get into a little deeper into that later on, but it's good just to know how to do it. Well, now that we've done angle A, let's do the three trig functions for angle B. Okay? If you look here, it's the exact same triangle. Here, it's the exact same triangle, right? The sides are 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5. But now I'm focusing on doing the three trig functions of angle B, which means then that this is now my opposite side. This right here tells me this is still my hypotenuse, and then what's left over, this is going to be my adjacent side. The angle B now dictates how I'm labeling my triangle. So since I'm focusing on angle B, this is going to be the opposite side. And this is, of course, the hypotenuse. Notice, by the way, guys, that the hypotenuse never changes, right? The hypotenuse never changes direction. It never changes labeling. It's always the longest side of the right triangle. So now this is my adjacent side. So let's do the sine, cosine, and tangent of angle B. Well, the sine function tells me that it is the opposite over the hypotenuse. Opposite of 3 over hypotenuse of 5. So that's going to be 3 over 5 is equal to 0.6. So the sine function of angle B is 3 over 5, or 0.6. Let's do the cosine function of angle B. The cosine function is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So the adjacent is 4, the hypotenuse is 5, so it should be 4 over 5. And we look here, sure enough, the cosine of angle B is 4 over 5, or 0.8. And finally, let's do the tangent function of angle B. The tangent function of angle B is the opposite over the adjacent, which means that it is going to be the opposite of 3 over the adjacent of 4, which is 3 over 4, or 0.75. And those are the three trig functions for both acute angles. Notice, by the way, that here when I did A, labeled A determined, angle A determined how I labeled my triangle, and then once I was doing the three trig functions of angle B, then that determined how I labeled my triangle again. Okay, so depending what angle you're focusing on is going to determine how you label your triangle. The hypotenuse is always dictated by the right angle. It's always across from the 90-degree angle, but the angle determines that the angle you're focusing on determines which one is the opposite and the adjacent. Let's take a look at the next question. Next question, we have a triangle that looks like this, and we're looking at questions 560 on page 562. We're going to be doing questions 10, 11, and 13. Let's take a look here. Well, here I have my triangle. It's labeled R, angle R, T, and S. And they want the three trig functions of angle R, T, and S. So I just decided to do angle R first. Do you have to do angle R first? No, but I just like to start with angle R first. So let's do the sine, cosine, and tangent of angle R. Right? So the sine of angle R is going to be the what? It's going to be the opposite over the hypotenuse. Well, by the way, let me stop for a second here. Notice here's angle R, right? Notice how this is going to be my opposite side. My 90 degree tells me that this is my hypotenuse, and what's left over, this is my adjacent side here. So notice I'm doing angle R first, so angle R is telling me across from angle R that this is going to be my opposite side. So now that I've labeled my triangle, we should always label it first. Now let's do the three trig functions of angle R. So the sine function of angle R is going to be the opposite over the hypotenuse. Well, the opposite is 45. My hypotenuse is 53. So the sine is going to be opposite over hypotenuse, 45 over 53, which is 0.8491. So the sine of angle R is 0.8491. Let's do the cosine function. The cosine function of angle R tells me that it is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So the adjacent is 28, the hypotenuse is 53, so it's adjacent over hypotenuse, so it's 28 over 53. So the cosine of angle R is 28 over 53, which is 0.5283. So the cosine function of angle R is 0.5283. And finally, let's do the tangent function of angle R. And the tangent function tells us that we should do the opposite over the adjacent. Well, the opposite side happens to be 45, and the adjacent side happens to be 28, so it's going to be 45 over 28. So the tangent of angle R is 45 over 28, which is 1.6071. So the tangent of angle R is 1.6701. And here I have the answers for the three trig functions of angle R. Now, let's find the three trig functions of angle S. Okay, let's do the three trig functions of angle S. Well, since my focus is going to be on angle S, well, that means I'm going to have to change how I label my triangle. And that's the first thing that you should do. And I did that here. Let's take a look here. So here, my focus now is on angle S. So since I'm dealing with angle S, well, this is going to be opposite of angle S. This 90-degree angle is always across from the hypotenuse, so that tells me the hypotenuse there. And this is going to be left over, is going to be my adjacent side. By now, you could probably tell that the first thing you should always label down is probably the hypotenuse, right? The hypotenuse is always the easiest side to see. And if you notice here between these two triangles, notice the hypotenuse doesn't change at all. The label doesn't change. The hypotenuse is always across from the 90-degree angle. So if I could give you any advice, label your triangle first, and then make sure that when you do that, you label the hypotenuse first. So here's angle S. I labeled my hypotenuse. There's the opposite side. This is the adjacent side. So let's do the three trig functions of angle S. So let's do the sine, cosine, and tangent function. So the sine function of angle S is going to be the opposite over the hypotenuse. Well, the opposite is 28. The hypotenuse is 53. So it's going to be 28 over 53. And there it is. Sine of S is 28 over 53, which gives me 0.5283 when I put it in the calculator. Let's do the cosine of angle S. The cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So the adjacent here is 45, the hypotenuse is 43, So the cosine of S is going to be 45 over 53, and that's going to give me 0.8491. And finally, now let's do the tangent function of angle S. The tangent is the opposite over the adjacent. Here's my opposite, here's my adjacent. It's 28 over 45, so the tangent of S is 28 over 45, which is 0.622 repeating. And these are the three trig functions of angle S. And here we can see